Hello, everyone! Welcome to LoFi History this lovely Tuesday. We've got Glenn and Marie here, and of course, I'm Libba. And for anyone who is just joining us for the first time for LoFi History... Oh, wait, what's going on? Oh, I hear myself.
Shouldn't you?
Where do I hear myself? On Facebook, that's why.
Oh.
All right, we're all set now. If this is your first time to LoFi History, then this is a fun way to get your history questions answered by our experts, Glenn and Marie. I'm here in the background to make sure we get your questions, as well as offer some sweet beats to learn to. So I also see that I'm a little bit in the way of Glenn. I'm gonna scoot myself over. No, that's the wrong way. You're not helping, Glenn.
That's me. I don't help.
No. So now y'all are dressed pretty interestingly this fine afternoon.
Thank you, Libba.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about what you are wearing. We'll start with Glenn.
I'm wearing wool because I am dressed as a Norman person, a Norman from the Duchy of Normandy circa 11th century, and Anglo-Saxons could dress a lot like this too. We had a program here earlier today where I portrayed William the Conqueror, which was a lot of fun, and so I thought I would just hang on to this incredibly cool, incredibly fashionable piece of clothing. It may not be cool with wool garments and wool cloaks and things like that, but that's okay. And the sunglasses, however, are actually late 13th century, so I'm a little out of the time scheme there.
Don't believe his lies. Okay, Marie, what are you wearing?
Yes, I'm wearing, this is medieval fantasy, if you will. Not necessarily any means historically accurate, but it is based off of the painting of the Lady of Shalott, who is indeed very much steeped in medieval folklore and culture. It's the poem about King Arthur and his court and the Lady of Shalott. But this dress is based off a painting from the mid-1800s. Based off of the poem from the early 1800s.
Very cool. And did you say who wrote that poem? I'm sorry, I was mixing
Alfred
sound.
Lord Tennyson.
Ah, that's a fancy name.
Yes.
Yes, the 18th century was a renaissance of the medieval period,
Yes, they
if you
like
will.
the medieval a lot.
Yeah.
The romanticism, how many paintings are there of
Medieval
the Lady of
ladies,
Shalott
yes.
doing her thing and
the
her thing,
boats.
and the guys going like this?
Yeah, well, and of course, I'm sure you made this dress
I
yourself.
did!
Now, was this one of the more difficult pieces? Talk to me about the research behind it that you had to do.
So it was actually a really fun thing, because I have like a historical YouTube channel called Historical Belle, where I do sewing things. And there's another girl, her name's Caroline, and she has a channel called the Ambrosio Designs. Because COVID, costuming events and events just in general have been canceled, so instead of usually there's a big costume event in California called Costume College, that got canceled. So instead of that, a lot of costumers got together and decided to do this thing called Co-COVID, where we did like a virtual conference. So Caroline of the Ambrosio Designs and I decided to come together to do a collaboration, and I challenged her to create a dress inspired by Monet, the lady with the umbrella painting, and she sent me the painting, The Lady of Shalott. So I really went off of that painting there that she sent me, that she challenged me to recreate a dress that was inspired by it. This one was a little more complicated in the fact that I did all this embroidery.
Yeah,
I was gonna say,
beautiful.
it sounds like you got the short end of that stick.
Yeah,
that
right.
challenge.
A little bit, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was really excited about it because I had been wanting to get into some medieval fantasy stuff. And then also, I didn't have to do the embroidery. I just decided to because I had just gotten my embroidery machine. So I was just like, I must embroider everything. And I was just looking for things in my house where I'm like, this is a scarf that I've had forever. I'm going to embroider it.
T-shirt,
yes,
embroider
it. Needs embroidery.
Socks, embroider.
Yes. So I did embroidery on the sleeves. This is different than the embroidery on the painting, and the embroidery on the painting is just squares, which is kind of boring, and also my machine didn't do that. But my machine had this really fun kind of leafy pattern pattern already programmed into it that I decided to do, and then also had like this matchy leafy one that I decided to do in the middle. In the painting, the Lady of Shalott, hers doesn't have one in the middle. She actually has like gold necklaces, but I didn't have a gold necklace, so I was like, I still need something gold in the front, so I decided to just embroider it.
Why didn't you get a machine that makes the gold necklaces?
Because I don't do jewelry, I do sewing.
Yeah,
Glenn.
Why not? I mean, do they even make those? A machine that you just push a button and gold starts pouring out?
That would be lovely.
Like a 3D printer, but with gold.
With gold. It's modern alchemy.
Well, like a Rumpelstiltskin situation,
oh my
but
gosh.
modern.
Yeah, really. Well, we got some folks joining us, our regulars. We have Fried on Twitch. Hello,
Hi,
Fried. And Fried is actually one of our mods now. So thank you so much for offering to mod for us. That means moderate. So he's going to help us out with anything we need in the chat. So on our Twitch end, on our Facebook, we've got Roseanne. Hi, Roseanne.
I know Roseanne.
Yeah, we know Roseanne. And actually, Roseanne has a great question. So Roseanne says, I'm interested to know which of the many misunderstandings or myths in history really bug you. Any topic in history, anytime. Top 2, please.
Oh, top 2?
So I'll give you some time to think about that. And in the meantime, y'all might notice at home that we have a lovely donation goal. Yes, now, so with all of our free live streams, we are trying to reach a monthly donation goal, just $100. We're almost halfway there already, so I'm sure we're gonna make that. But if you would like to donate, then go to bit.ly/jangoal, and you will be able to help us out there. An alert will pop up with anything you'd like to say, or just the amount that you donate. So help us out to reach that January goal if you can. If not, we're so glad that you're here anyway.
That's right.
Was that enough time?
That was enough time. Did you get a couple?
I have at least one.
You want to start?
Do you want me to start with my one and then you do one?
Well, look, because I definitely have 2.
Okay,
let me start with one,
and then I'll do
and then I'll come back, and then maybe you'll have
another one.
have considered what you hate.
Yes.
So I have 2 here. One is from the medieval period, and it is the idea that knights in armor were simply helpless, and if they fell on their back, they couldn't get up because the armor was too heavy and ungainly. And there are even some movies that have pictures of guys having to be hoisted up onto their horse with a crane because the armor is so heavy.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. You know, I didn't really think about that, but it's very funny. It's a funny image. But okay, so knights, I mean, they probably trained quite a lot to be in this armor.
Yes, you have to understand that a true medieval knight, whether we're talking about 11th century or all the way up into the mid 1500s, their job, their purpose was to fight and be good at it. So the entire structure of their life was built around equipping themselves, training themselves in the perfect way. We're not talking about just regular foot soldiers. Knights are beyond elite in their ability to fight and in the equipment that they have. And you're not going to fight in something that's going to weigh you down and prevent you from moving. You're going to wear something that protects you and allows you to move. There are, if you go on YouTube, and Google somersault knight, there are guys who have modern suits of full plate armor that are made for them, that are made to their specifications. They can literally do cartwheels. They can climb up ladders. You can get on a horse with armor. I've done it, right? You don't need a crane. If you need a crane, then something's wrong and it's not historically accurate. So yes.
Or something. Well, because Henry VIII did, but that was because his own body.
Well, he was a little heavy when he still wanted to play jouster when he physically couldn't do it anymore.
Thank you so
but
much,
that was because
Laura.
of his...
I just wanted to give a little
Yay!
shout out. Yay! Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it.
Yes. So that's my
because
first.
of his own body, not because of the armor.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's my first one. Is the armor was somehow constrictive and made one immobile. The exact opposite was the case.
Mine is very similar to that, but with corsets.
Oh yes.
Corsets were not torture devices. They were structural support garments, very much like a bra in the modern day. Women did not wear, they wore corsets only really from about what I would consider like 1820s to 1910 would be a corset. Before that, you had stays, which was very much the pre-runner to the corset, but they were built differently. It's just like, it's fabric that makes it so that, you know, everything stays where it's supposed to stay.
And you're not, I mean, in a corset, if it's fitted properly, you're not having to have people like leaning
No,
up against a
you
tree
don't,
and
like-
tighten it until you die,
Yeah.
right?
Of course not. Women who worked would not try to strangle themselves with their own garments of clothing.
I feel like every single, I mean, not every single, but like so many Victorian era or, you know, 17th century even, it's always, there's that quintessential scene.
Like yanking
Yeah.
the girl in the
Yeah.
corset. And I'm like, that did happen. People tight-laced because they wanted to look pretty and look skinny, like that was a thing. But that wasn't everyone. That was a very small fraction of people who were trying to achieve a very high-end society silhouette, and that would not be their normal everyday. They were going to be doing that because they were going to a ball, a social event where they wanted to look a certain way, and that's not when they're going to be working. Because ladies of every class were going to wear a corset. They were going to wear a corset or stays or something that would make it to where like it was more comfortable to do work because you're
Right.
you're compressed up top.
Historically, clothing fits and works.
Yes.
I mean, that needs to be said. And we today, I think, with our easy blue jeans and t-shirts, look at anything beyond that, right, as something that is just uncomfortable, constrictive, socially oppressive, all the things. And the garments, I mean, like I said, I'm wearing wool. I'm not sweating to death. I'm not burning up. I'm not itching to death. People get used to the things they wear. They're just part of you.
Clothing. And if you have something that's made right, that's made to your body, that you have worn and broken in for years upon years, some people, if they've tuned into some of my historical costuming things or the getting dressed in the Victorian era, you have seen my corset, which it looks well worn because it is. I've had it for about 10 years. It's very well broken in, very much formed to my body, and I can fall asleep in that thing. It's comfy. It's part of me. It's very much just like
It's made to Marie's measurements.
yes, it was made for me. I've worn it and broken it in for who knows how long. Of course, I could try to strangle myself with it. But you could do that with any piece of clothing if you try hard enough.
And I have faith you could succeed. You can do anything you set your mind to.
Thank you, Glenn.
Those are excellent myths to bust. But now that was 1 and 1, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now I also wanted to mention Rashid on Facebook says regarding the armor, maybe it was the first day in armor that they were falling around.
Yeah, maybe. You know what? Maybe their first day, because you've got to get used to it. You're putting
Kind of like a corset.
Yes. You're
gotta
putting
get used to it.
Depending upon the armor, you're putting anywhere from 30 to 90 pounds of stuff on your body. And you know what? Modern military people wear that in terms of load-bearing equipment and ammo and rucksacks. And usually, it's much more awkward to wear that weight because it's all in a pack, right? Or it's all in pouches here. Armor goes over you almost like a second skin. So it is much more conformed to your body and the weight is evenly distributed. So yeah, good point, Rashid.
Yeah. And JM, good to see you, JM. You're a regular here. Let's see. Oh yeah, kind of like firefighters. You get used to the equipment and conditions.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely. So let's move on to your second least favorite myth.
So here's my second, and those of you who have watched me before have heard this one, so you'll just have to settle down and listen to it again. During the American Revolution, the idea that the Americans all had rifles and all hid behind logs and trees and boulders and shot at the British, who were stupid because they wore red and marched in straight lines. It's not what you think, right? That is not how things work. That is not how the American Revolution was fought. That is not the tactics of the day. The battle that comes closest to that, and it doesn't even really approach that, is the Battle of Kings Mountain that happens in South Carolina on top of a mountain. And it's so much more complicated than that. The tactics of the time, the technology determines how the weapons were used, the most effective methods. Having bayonets on the end of the guns actually makes a huge difference. So the soldiers, when they fought in an open battle, the people, and here's how you know this was false. In the very beginning of the American Revolutionary War, when the Americans were very untrained and were trying to hide, in entrenchments or behind trees and things, and the British would march in a solid line with bayonets towards them, guess who won those battles, folks? The British. The British won those battles because they were easily able to push those disorganized soldiers off the field and make them run away. It wasn't until the Americans learned how to stand up in their own uniforms in linear formations in the open that they were able to actually defeat the British. So there's that for anyone who believes in that. I think
I could only. I was honestly only half paying attention because I was in the chat. My bad. But very interesting, Glenn.
Thank you, Libba.
Also want to just quickly give a shout out to one of our chatters, Lagger on Twitch. I think this might be your first time joining us, so welcome to LoFi History. And I've also got, they were asking how to donate, JM. I put a link in the chat for you. And yes, thank you so much if you'd like to make a donation. Appreciate it. Well, Glenn, I'm sure it was a very interesting point. I apologize.
No, it's Libba, it's nothing you haven't heard before.
Yeah, right.
Maybe a couple times.
Okay, so Marie, what is your second?
Mine is a little bit of a history thing, but also a people thing. When people think or ask questions about a fictional historical character as if that person is real.
Yeah.
Like when I gave tours of a plantation home, Stately Oaks plantation home, and people would ask, "Oh, so did Scarlett O'Hara live here?" And like they're not kidding.
Aw.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many times when you were confronted with that question did you just go, "Yes"?
She's alive and well.
Did you ever do that?
Day.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Well, she's not real. We can talk about the real people who lived here, but
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's understandable that. I mean, part of it is. Oh, thank you so much, Karen.
Yay!
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you for your $15 donation. Thank you so much. Aw. And thanks for being here with us. But yeah, because part of it's kind of like, well, I mean, history education could be better. So, and especially its portrayal in the media, you just can't help. I mean, when people see something that's a historic event in a movie, they're gonna,
And they become emotionally invested in those fictional characters.
And they might not have come to the actual historical place to learn about actual historical things if it were not for the historical drama in the first place.
Right.
So
Highclere Castle and Downton Abbey being the perfect examples of that, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right.
So I value them. I just sometimes I wish people did a little bit more research.
Well, that's our job.
That is
if everyone did their own research, Marie and I would be unemployed.
So actually, don't do your research so I can keep a job.
We should just have a new service called Let Me Google That For You. We'll be set. All right, so that was both of yours, right? Yes.
Yes.
So our next question comes from, let's see, we've got a question from Fried. Fried says, in most modern Japanese sword arts, the katana is wielded with two hands, but there are important medieval handbooks like 5 Rings that advise to use them with one hand. Do you have an opinion on that?
As a practitioner of using a weapon, or from a historical perspective of the literature? Both? No.
Okay, first,
combat.
Hold on.
No,
first,
go ahead.
What is a katana? Are you knowing that?
No.
I don't
Yes,
even know.
you do know. You did. I mean, think of the classic samurai person with a thin curved blade, right?
Okay.
That's a katana.
Cool.
That's a katana.
Yeah.
So fighting combat with a blade is an art form, and those who practice it and who do very well are artists. And as you know, artists all have different approaches to their medium and how they want to interpret things. And maybe I'm getting a little too deep here, but I firmly believe this. So you're going to get certain senses of, well, this works for me, and I have perfected this single-hand fighting style. Therefore, that's what I'm going to teach you because it works for me. And there are others who will say, two-handed is stronger. It allows you more leverage. You've got a fulcrum point built in when you're using the blade this way. It's really going to depend upon circumstances, and I think my opinion would be there is no single form that's going to suit you for every situation you find yourself in. For example, you're not going to be able to use two hands on a sword or an axe if you're also carrying a shield. You can have a two-handed sword, but that shield, if you've ever fought with one, is a remarkably effective defensive tool. Sometimes a little bit offensive if you know how to use it. But that shield is going to protect you so well and can offset the disadvantage of having only a single hand to use the sword. With a single hand, you're not going to be able to hit as hard or create that fulcrum point, but you're going to be able to defend yourself a lot better. Japanese, the Bushido and Kendo and things like that, the sportified version of Japanese sword fighting, there are different approaches as well, right? The Japanese tend not to use shields for the combat. There's a couple of different reasons for that, some practical, some cultural, but they also adopted this two-handed fighting style. You could either have your katana with two hands, or they had sometimes that double sword take, right? Where you would have a katana in one hand and a shorter sword in the other. I can't remember the Japanese name for the in-between sword shape. So it all depends on what the particular practitioner of martial arts and their chosen weapon style is going to dictate. There's no set, hard and fast, this is better or not. That's my opinion.
And probably a good chance to mention that you have a live stream coming up about European martial arts, and that's
right.
going to be on January 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Yes.
So that's free, and you can join us for that on YouTube and Facebook here on January 20th. You can just check out our YouTube channel or Facebook events to get more details on that. All right, next question. Glenn or Marie, do you have knowledge about the Arab-Israeli War in 1948?
Yes.
Okay, can you, wait, let me see what the exact question
Now, are you just
is.
making this question up, or?
They just, oh, no.
Okay.
This is from Lager.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Yes.
They just want to know what your opinion on this event is. I am not familiar with it, so maybe for our audience who is also not familiar with it, you could give us an introduction to this conflict.
Yeah. Okay.
Where to begin?
In the book of Genesis. we won't go back that far.
Yeah.
Let's
But
only.
honestly, where the
Yeah,
good
but
place to start.
I mean, it kind of is because the Jewish people consider themselves the chosen nation of God, and so God in the Old Testament gave them this land of Canaan, and this is part of their culture. It's part of their religion, and over time, with the different, the Assyrians, the Romans, the Muslims, the Fatimid, all these people, they've come through and they've sort of conquered the land where the traditional home of Israel is. And even, you get into the modern imperial period, that becomes sort of a protectorate area between France and Great Britain, depending upon where you draw the lines. And during World War I, there was a discussion of should Arabia be, because the Ottoman Empire controlled all of that. And at the end of World War I, people, even before the war was over, could see that the Ottoman Empire was about to crumble, that it was going to be defeated in this war, and that it was going to allow a lot of territory to go to someone. Should that territory go to the British or the French? Should it become independent nation states such as Arabia, such as a Palestinian state, such as an Israeli state? Well, at that point, with the Treaty of Versailles, it comes and becomes colonial powers. Mostly controlled by the British. Look up the Balfour Declaration. Moving into World War II, it's still protectorate areas, but then something happens in World War II that kind of helps the Israeli claim on land to have a homeland, because they hadn't had it literally since ancient times by this point. With the effects of the Holocaust on the Jewish population in Europe and just the cultural problems that creates around the world, it has made a lot of international sympathy for the Jewish cause to have a set place where they can live, where they can have their own nation, and they will not be subject to a crazed maniac and a nation state bent on genocide in the future. Well, people already live there, right? There are other Palestinians, there are people of the Muslim faith that live in this area, and so there is a huge effort by people of the Jewish faith and of Jewish heritage to create this nation state. They come from the United States, Germany, Great Britain, France, Russia, right? They're people who have fought in the wars. They're people who have influence in different civilian national governments, and they come to what is Israel, and they decide to have a war for independence. And this movement really gets started in 1948. And again, this is really history in a nutshell, right? Mm-hmm. I know I'm droning on, but it really is sort of...
it's still a very compact
version.
It's
still a very compact version. Israel declares independence as a nation state. The first country to recognize the nation of Israel as an independent and sovereign nation is the United States. When they declare this, lots of other Arab countries declare war on them and come in to basically destroy them. Israel not only has to survive this attack, but what it wants to do is gain access to Jerusalem, which of course is the historical, political, cultural, and religious center of who Israel is. And so they begin an effort to try to get to Israel and to hold Israel. And the UN steps in with United States and Russian and French and British influence to create a ceasefire for this war. And the ceasefire at the end of the war technically is where, at that point, the boundaries of Israel are set to be, with protection and support of the United Nations and especially the United States. Now, from 1948 on, there's a lot that happens. Different Arab countries try to crush Israel time and again. Israel eventually, and one of its biggest enemies is Egypt. And then when Jimmy Carter's in office, they have the Camp David Accords, where Egypt actually creates a peace deal with Israel, and knock on wood, they haven't fought since. Like I said, Egypt was one of the most vehement enemies of Israel and one of the most organized, and after Camp David, they have recognized Israel's right to exist and its independence. And so that's the roots of the 48 war. That's why it's important, and that sort of sets up a lot of the issues in the Middle East going into the modern era.
Thank you. That was a good, in a nutshell, version. Now,
there are a multiplicity of books this thick that can tell you more about it.
Thank you for that, Lager. They also mentioned that it was the case that there were 5 Arab nations and the Israeli nation was unarmed? Is that?
Well, they were not unarmed when they declared independence. Like I said, they had because at this point, since the Jewish people had no nation of their own, they were members of a lot of different nations. They had a lot of experience fighting in wars, and you have folks who had been infantrymen and folks who had been generals and admirals, and they had pooled resources together from around the world to capture or purchase weapons, tanks, rifles, bazookas, things like that. There's a lot of surplus after World War II floating around. One of the, I really like this, one of the great ironies of history is that a lot of the weapons that the Jewish people used in their war for independence in 1948 were German World War II surplus.
Oh, wow.
German tanks. It's so neat to see this German rifle, with the Waffen-Amps with a little, swastika and eagle on it, and stamped right next to it is like a Star of David because it's been taken into Israeli army service, and they use that to fight for their independence. It's this neat little historical serendipity thing.
That is fascinating.
I think. Those are really neat pieces of material culture.
Yeah. Roseanne mentioned, now that would be a fun challenge for y'all. We throw out 2 random historical periods and see how you connect them. Mentioned that earlier.
It can be done.
It can be done. All right, so Erica has a question. Erica on Facebook asks, is there any comparison, or why are people comparing last week to 1776? So, of course, a big event in our own history happened last week at the Capitol. So, Are there any connections to make to the tensions rising before the American Revolution, to present day tensions in y'all's historical opinion?
We typically try to stay away from current politics because that can get sticky, but
Yeah.
we can say just a little bit. Do you want to touch this from the 10-foot pole, or you want me to go on a limb?
You can go on a limb.
I think a couple of things it's important to remember that all independence movements, all freedom movements start with folks who believe in what they're doing, and one person's revolutionary and freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. And to quote one of the great philosophers of the late 20th century, you'll find that a great many of the truths we cling to depend greatly upon our own point of view. And so I think it's important to consider other people's points of view, and when you do that and you have conversations and discussions, you tend to be able to avoid a lot of the violence and unrest that you see happen in the different worlds. So I think there's a lot of comparisons that can be made to a lot of different parts of history. And one of the popular things that people like to say is, well, history repeats itself. I don't think history repeats itself, but sometimes it rhymes. Mm-hmm. You can see it's difficult to be objective when it comes to the recent and modern stuff. I really think that it's difficult to be truly objective. History can help us understand it. It can help us contextualize it, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a one-to-one, comparison and ratio.
Yeah.
I would caution us against that.
Yeah.
It can inform, but not act as an augur.
Because history can also be used, or versions of history can be used to support different people's ideas that it
They
might
were.
not actually support.
They were.
Yeah, definitely lessons we can learn from history, about history,
Yes.
and modern days. So I appreciate your question, Erica.
Yeah, and some people may recognize who the great philosopher was from that quote that I gave you.
Oh yes, who is that?
I'm going to see if anyone notices
Oh
first.
yeah. Does anybody know who that was? I have a guess. Just because you tend to quote this person a lot, or at least you have recently.
If Hat Mouse is watching, he may
Yeah,
know.
I know, right? Now,
Well,
was
you
it?
did quote two people.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
we'll
true.
see. We'll see if anyone guesses.
Okay.
What that quote was. But thank you, Erica, for your question. It gave us a good opportunity to speak to a difficult time for us right now, and we're happy that all of you can be here to better understand our history, learn how Glenn's rules of history, and how we as a team at the Northeast Georgia History Center approach teaching history. It really is so important to remain as objective as possible and realize that, we are not those people back then. We want to try to understand them. And at some point, there's a limit to that, to how
Right.
intimately we can understand them.
And we're not infallible, right?
Yeah.
We appreciate you asking us the questions, but we don't always have all the answers.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
One of my favorite quotes about history is, we don't come away with all the answers, but we come away with better questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to JM's question. JM is asking, we've answered this in length, and I'll send you a link to it. What do you think of Hamilton historically?
We did a whole thing on this.
Yeah, last
We
year.
did.
It was one of our really fairly popular,
it was popular.
live streams. I'll put a link into the chat with that one.
yeah.
It was our Hamilton, so y'all compared the history of Hamilton the person to the
musical.
To the musical, and that was a really fun one. So
Yes.
let me find that while
Yeah.
y'all take it away. I'd love to hear from both of you on the person of Hamilton, and maybe Marie, I know you're a big fan of Hamilton.
I do like the musical.
Yeah, well, maybe you could talk to us about what you as a historian value about the musical. I know you have a theater background as well, so you also value it as a thespian.
Cultural
Yeah.
piece of art.
Yeah.
I think Hamilton is a really interesting story that makes the founding of America more relevant and more understandable and more relatable to people today, as the story of the founding of America for Americans today. There's a lot of really awesome things to be said about it from a theater standpoint as well. From a historical standpoint, there is a lot that is good about Hamilton. Lin-Manuel Miranda did a lot of research. There are direct quotes from different debates, different textuals, different letters, different speeches that are therefore like very much indeed quote for quote in different lyrics and different songs. Of course, the danger, or perhaps just the limit of it, it's still a 3-hour musical, but it doesn't still capture completely the essence of Hamilton. It's a 3-hour musical. I don't think any. But see, that's the thing I've been thinking about lately. People are like, oh, well, they should have included this, that, and the other. I'm like, what do you want this to be? This is already a 3-hour musical.
Just read the Chernow book.
Like, you would have to read, well, I feel like to actually understand Hamilton. Otherwise, you would just get that one version of Hamilton. Like,
Well,
that's
true enough, yeah.
That's the problem with books. That's the problem with musicals, movies, anything. Even different people. Even if you met someone who knew Hamilton, you would only have that person's impression of Hamilton.
Yep.
So, you can't completely know Hamilton after just watching the musical. And it does leave some things out. It's only a 3-hour musical. I say only. It's still a really long musical. But it doesn't capture everything about Hamilton. Some things are portrayed better to make him look better. Some things are portrayed differently than perhaps some other people would choose. That's different writing choices and different staging choices that go along to help create the narrative that is the musical, that may or may not necessarily be historically accurate. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Would you say that, like, so if someone who is, we actually have David from Wales in the chat. Hey,
Hey, David.
And they're asking, it says, my daughter claims she learned American history from Hamilton, the musical. Was it historically accurate? So I think the takeaway from what Marie was saying is that you probably get the ideology and the sort of feelings of the revolution, but not necessarily historically accurate. Is that fair?
I mean, it's a musical. I wouldn't say it's not perfect in its historical portrayal, but I do think you do learn, you have a good introduction to American history. All right. I would say. I don't think you learn, I mean, I still don't know everything about American history, and I have a degree, but I think it's a good introduction to Hamilton that then can further introduce you to more research and more background. But I do think you learned a good bit, and I don't think you learned anything that was too outrageous. There are some things that are, and of course, I think that the Schuylers did actually have sons. It's not just the Schuyler sisters. They had more siblings. They did have brothers. That's just like a blatant lie. There are only a few things that I would consider to be blatant lies, and then others that are perhaps more half-truths.
Yeah. So a good introduction. Yeah. Maybe, like we were saying earlier, media that gets you interested in the topic, but don't let it stop there.
Yeah.
Come back to us and we'll tell you more. David says, I'll buy her a book on American history.
There you go, yay!
You can buy one from our gift shop.
That's right.
We do, we have many.
All right, so let's see. And Gabby on Facebook says, this is why I appreciate how y'all make learning about history fun. Thank you so much.
Yay.
And JM says, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I so appreciate that. All right, so let me dig into the chat and find our next question. So Stacy on Facebook asks, so during Family Day, our recent virtual Family Day about World War II, which you can go back and watch on YouTube, Glenn talked about the home front during World War II. What was the home front like during World War I?
Oh.
Maybe a nice comparison.
No, that is a good question. That is a good question. Since we're talking about America, United States, and in the Family Day, I'm going to assume that we're just talking about the home front in World War I in the United States too. It did not have nearly as transformative effect on American society. It didn't have, because we were only in it the last, not even quite year and a half.
That's just enough time to get everything going.
Yeah, we did not. I guess I should start by saying what we didn't have in comparison to World War II. We barely had any rationing. We did not have a major disruption of services, of food, or anything like that. We did not have gasoline rationing or rubber rationing or anything like that. We did not have the efforts to desegregate industry like we did in World War II. We did not have nearly as many women going into war work because there wasn't time to crank everything up and maintain it. So it wasn't nearly as all-encompassing in World War I as it was with World War II. Couple of things though, Victory Gardens did spring up in World War I. That was something that started then. The economy was actually booming on the American home front during World War I because we were making lots of money selling stuff to the warring powers overseas. Whether it was, we're not supposed to be selling weapons of war, but we could sell steel, we could sell foodstuffs, we could sell grain, we could sell gasoline, lots of different products.
What they do with it after is their problem.
Right, exactly. And they desperately needed these things, so they were paying top dollar. And so our economy shot through the roof in the early part.
20s.
That's right. Well, until it wasn't.
Yeah.
But that yes, so that's neither here nor there. So the it wasn't, for most of the Great War, the American home front consisted of a booming economy and us reading the paper going, wow, things look pretty bad over there. Wow, this war is spreading everywhere. I'm getting kind of upset at the Germans for killing Belgian nuns and babies. And so eventually, there was a critical mass of people who wanted to get involved in the war. But by and large, it wasn't nearly as huge an effect as World War II was on the home front.
Short pause. Thank you so much, Roseanne.
Oh, Roseanne,
For
thank
your
you.
$15 donation. Thanks for all that you do. Oh, thank you. Yay.
Yay.
Little talk about war, and then a yay.
I was Rosanna Coke.
Roseanne says, we had Liberty Gardens. So, I guess they probably went by another name. Victory Gardens, Liberty Gardens. Very cool. So, it seems like there was a bit more of a distance with World War
comparatively, there was. I mean, of course, in World War I, we didn't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
But, there was not quite as...
There wasn't as much patriotic fever, perhaps. There was still a good
not
bit.
Not until we actually got in.
Yeah.
And then when we got in, it was like, yeah, we're going to go kill Germans! No offense, Brian. And then that sort of subsided, right?
It was because it was so quick.
It was so quick.
It didn't last as long. Where World War II is much more sustained and had...
It didn't last long for us.
Yeah.
Longer.
Yes.
Longer than the other one.
So, Robert has a question. Oh, Robert and Fried also mentioned that shorter sword you were trying to think of before was a wakizashi.
Wakizashi. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Robert asks, do you know the Charlie Brown Franz Stickler story that happened during World War II? Are you familiar with that?
I do not know that one.
You have
got
stumped
me.
Glenn.
Ding.
Let me Google this. Oh, it was an incident in 1943 when, after a successful bomb run on Bremen, Second Lieutenant Charles Brown had a B-17 Flying Fortress. It was severely damaged by German fighters. So, some kind of incident there. We'll have to learn a little bit more about that.
I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah. All right, let's see what else we've got in the chat. Doodly-doo. All right. Oh, JM says, first of all, Fried says, no offense taken, so good.
I mean, you wanted to kill us too, so rightly so.
Yeah, right. And JM says, we keep teaching our Girl Scouts about gardens. Oh, yes, that's an excellent activity for Girl Scouts, and this is actually my area of expertise because I portray Juliet Gordon-Lowe, the founder of Girl Scouts, for our webcasts and for schools all over Georgia. And yes, Girl Scouts were really influential in World War I. It was kind of the time that set them on the map to be it was an affirming time for Girl Scouts. They were extremely helpful. They were helping with the Red Cross. They were teaching the people at the home front, mostly women, how to conserve food through their thrift programs. So, and they were also selling war bonds. So this was really a time when people got to see Girl Scouts in action and actually be like, all right, Girl Scouts. We thought it was controversial before when you were decided to be called Scouts, because if you were not aware, the original group was called American Girl Guides, based on the British version. So it's basically a sister organization of the Boy Scouts, but only a year after being Girl Guides in Savannah, Georgia, they wanted to be Girl Scouts, and Juliette Lowe agreed. So during the era of World War I and then earlier in the 20s, that's really when Girl Scouts grow in just huge, really explosion of Girl Scouts across the country. They go from 1912 to having 18 girls, 1920 to having over 80,000 Girl Scouts. So, yeah. So there's my little bit of lo-fi history.
Yay!
Yay! So let's see. We've got some questions here. Let's see. Fried is asking, speaking of World War I, where do you guys stand on how it started? Was it the alliance system? Was a great war just inevitable? Was it because the great powers did nothing to avert it, etc.? There's so much literature out there. What's your take? Of course, the one thing I remember from school is the death of Franz Ferdinand.
Yes, Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Yes. And I don't even know, I can't remember the context or anything, so...
It was Serbian nationalists who assassinated him, Gavrilo Princip. And it's one of those. A friend of mine and I used to do reducto ad absurdum on that. Well, what started the war? Was it the alliance system? Was it Gavrilo Princip who shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand? Was it the guy who took the wrong turn driving the car? Was it the guy who sold Princip the gun? Was it the manufacturer who made the gun in the factory? Blah 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 blah. You could go crazy. In a nutshell, I'm going to have to say the real cause of World War I were nation states competing in the grand game of empire. By which I mean, Great Britain had overseas possessions. It had the world's largest navy. Germany was comparatively a relatively new nation in 1914. They had made huge strides. Unified Germany had been what most of Europe was afraid of for 1,000 years. And once it finally came to pass in the 1870s, it turns out that it was a massive economic, political powerhouse. And so it wanted to kind of play catch up with that great game of empire, and it was making huge strides, which made, France nervous. It made Russia nervous. It made especially Great Britain nervous. And so competing ideas in how to maintain those empires and how to maintain those respective monarchies came to a head. The alliance system was a major part of that. And once it got to a certain point, I don't know if you could say that the war was inevitable. Maybe that war, the way it did start, was perhaps not inevitable. But I kind of don't see how some kind of conflict between expanding militarized nation states was not going to end up into a gigantic grand conflict somehow.
Yeah.
Again, that is so summed up. But you asked.
Let's take a moment to thank David for David's $15 donation.
Yay.
Which
Thanks,
brings us to
David.
just
We're so close.
We're so close,
already.
only $4 away from our goal, so I'm definitely gonna have to stretch the goal out. Try to make it maybe 150 or 200. We'll see.
We've underestimated our wonderful audiences. We really have.
Well, it's the first time we've done a monthly
That's right.
goal. Wanted to make it attainable, but that is so awesome, and it just really helps us out. It really does keep these awesome programs going in our educational mission. So thank you so much for all of the donors today. All right, so we do have a few more questions. I know we're getting near the end, so if you do have any pressing questions for Glenn and Marie, get those questions in the chat now, and we'll finish up today with those. So, we have Karen. Karen asks, so tying together two of your topics, according to the website Famous Kin, William the Conqueror was 22nd times great-grandfather of Alexander Hamilton? Did you know that? Or can you confirm?
I mean, there's no way I can confirm.
That's interesting if it's true. I mean, I don't know the legitimacy of Famous Kin, but I mean,
I'm gonna go look that up now.
Go look it up. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's cool.
Are there other?
I can think of an inappropriate joke, but I'm not gonna say it here.
Yeah, say it after the stream.
I'll say it after the stream. That's for our members only section.
Yeah, right.
No, it has to do with their respective parentage. So
I see.
Yes.
Are there? I mean, that brings to mind people who are already historic figures that may have lineage to them. I mean, if it is, I think of course, like a much closer lineage is going to be like the Roosevelts, that type of thing.
Right.
But are there others that you're aware of that share an interesting history?
Well, not to kind of burst that bubble, but one of the things to consider is the way familial structures and genealogy works, right? And I think I read somewhere that 90%, if you have European stock in your, European genes in your makeup, 90% of the people with European genes are going to be related to Charlemagne in some way. Because that's just how it works, right? Charlemagne has 2 sons, and then those 2 sons have 2 sons, and then those 2 sons have 3 sons, and they all get married. And eventually there are just so many people that sprung from that line that eventually when you go back, everyone's going to have just a little bit of Charlemagne DNA in them somewhere.
Yeah.
And so if you go even, if you just keep going back, I think it's entirely plausible that Hamilton would have some William the Conqueror stock there.
Yeah.
If you go back, I think it's about at least 10 generations. Everyone's related to everyone somehow.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's thank David again. Look at that screen,
guys. Oh my gosh.
His message was,
wow.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Go,
David.
Yay.
David, you're one of our viewers that we talk about a fair amount when we get to say we have a national audience and an international audience. That's so neat.
You and Fred are part of our marketing scheme.
Yes.
The board is very impressed that we have our international audiences. So
thank you for that.
Yes.
As well as this.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much. All right, we got a few more questions. So let's see. Robert asks, can you explain the reason the Franco-Prussian War happened and the outcome of the war?
Oh.
Someone, I think Gabby may have mentioned it. They said that they would definitely watch a In a Nutshell series from us. So maybe we should consider that.
the quick history, yeah. Okay, so the Franco-Prussian War. So, the Franco-Prussian War is basically what gave rise to a unified German state. Basically, the German states, with Prussia kind of leading them and not egging them on, but kind of unifying them, decided to attack France for a particular part of territories, including Alsace-Lorraine. And basically, it was a loose German confederation that wanted to take these states from France, and they invaded France. And through excellent generalship, through some excellent, slightly more technologically advanced weaponry, the Germans actually do not only defeat France soundly, but they get into Paris. Right? They go all the way to getting into Paris. And what they do when they get into Paris, they don't necessarily say, well, France, you have to surrender to us now. The first thing they do is in the Hall of Mirrors is they declare the existence of Germany as a nation state and with Prussia at its head. And this is this is one of those hinges of history because because the effort had been a militarily focused one, the Prussians took the lead. When they declare the nation state, when they're trying to find a head of state, a monarch, therefore they pick the Prussian aristocracy to provide that monarch. It could have just as easily been, a Bavarian monarch or anything like that, but they chose Prussia, which set the course of the German state, of course, moving into World War I and to a certain extent into World War II. But in effect, that's what it was. It was them trying to take territories, and they took advantage of that to create a unified German state under a single monarchical head and a unified, more or less representative body in Berlin. In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. There you have it. Thank you, Robert, for your question. And Fried, our German friend, said, I've recruited 10 people under me, but I still haven't received a check from you guys.
Oh, well, they have to get 10 people too.
Yeah,
is how that works. Check your literature on that, and it should be in the very fine print.
And Stacy says, I am so glad I stumbled upon your live streams back in March of 2020. We are too.
So are
Stacey. Yes, we're so happy to provide them. Fried, on the topic of the Prussians, says, actually interesting what phrasing they chose in the Hall of Mirrors to declare Prussia's king as the emperor. I don't know.
No, tell us what that was. It may ring a bell, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, let us know. Oh, and Roseanne also says, thank you. All of these productions cheer us up at a time when we need more cheer. It cheers us up too, yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
We feel like we're taking advantage of you because this is one of our favorite times during the week.
Right.
We get to play dress up and come talk about history things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, while Fried, we'll end our questions there. While Fried gives us a little more context to their comment, let's talk about our upcoming live streams.
Yes.
So we have one tomorrow I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
Marie, tell us about tomorrow's live stream at 2 p.m.
So at 2 p.m. tomorrow, I will be talking about the history of tea.
Indeed.
Yes.
Now, give us just a taste of the history of tea. What's something surprising about the history of tea that most people might not be aware of?
So much. It goes back far. It literally is like, I think this might be one of our most in a nutshell programs,
Yeah,
because
right.
it's the history of tea in a nutshell, because it's so long. Tea, the history of tea doesn't begin with actual history. It begins with legend. History is so old that it is then legend, and then there are different legends about each there are several different countries that have their own legends about how tea plants came about and where they found them and how they were planted. How tea happened. Tea for a long time was not necessarily a drink. It was a salad type of deal where you would just eat it. You would eat the tea instead of drinking the tea.
Wow.
I'm thirsty, but I'm also craving dried leaves.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe it started out with dry leaves, and they're like, this needs something.
It's a little
This is-
dry.
yeah.
Maybe
It's a
some
little
water.
dry.
Yeah, so then that started, then they decided that tea and water is a better idea, and then that really took off. Didn't really take off. In most Asian countries is where it really started and took off, and it didn't come to the European countries until you have colonial empires going out and trading and bringing back things. The Dutch East India Company, the England East India Company. America also has its own interesting storied history with tea. The Boston Tea Party is probably our most famous tea party. And tea still has not recovered its popularity in America since the Boston Tea Party. We're very much more of a coffee nation. It's only slightly...
We're deep in spiritual darkness.
It is only more recently coming up with tea being more popular.
Yeah.
Gaining slight popularity. Where in England, before the 1600s, before colonial empires began, they were very much a coffee nation. And then tea was popularized. And then tea has stayed, and now tea is England's national drink. There's a lot of tea.
So
Tea
good.
parties, teacups,
Cream teas.
whole thing of tea. I think the most interesting thing I learned about tea and chai.
Don't give it all away.
Oh,
We need to get them to
okay.
tune in tomorrow at 2.
Well,
leave you in
okay.
suspense.
That's right.
It's so interesting,
The most
though.
interesting thing was beep.
All right, well, we'll save it for tomorrow. I put a link in all of the chats so you can join our Facebook event, and you'll see a link to join the actual event. That's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can always watch it afterward as well. So Fry did get back to us, and they said the Emperor of Germany would be the correct title, but the person who declared his title chose on the spot German Emperor, as in the nationality, not of the Germans, as the soft option to please everyone, not aggravating other kings.
Ah, okay.
Interesting there. All right. German
That's a good on your
nice
feet
semantics.
politics kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Well, we're going to end it there today perfectly. It is 5 p.m., so we will be back with more Lo-Fi history next Tuesday. This is every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. We're so glad that everyone joined us today. Thank you so much. And JM also says, you guys do a great job. We appreciate what
Thanks.
you do. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much to everyone who donated to our January donation goal. Definitely gonna increase our goal. That's awesome.
That's right.
So until we see you again, please, everyone, take care and keep on learning your history.
That's right.
Bye.
All right, bye, y'all.